Hello and welcome to the Satluj TV podcast. Now, members of our audience who were with us in our early days a couple of years ago may remember today's guest, an experienced journalist based in the US who has had a distinguished career in front of the camera, who also produced news reports for us in those early days. Well, I'm delighted to welcome back Leyla Guren to the channel. And I'm very pleased to say that Leyla is rejoining us to take on some special projects and interviews, particularly focusing on refugees and asylum seekers. Her new role involves capturing powerful, untold stories, voices of those who have fled injustice and oppression, especially, of course, from the Sikh and Punjabi diaspora, and find themselves rebuilding their lives in the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia. So today, she's actually going to start off by turning the tables on myself for a change, and she's going to be asking me a few questions and putting me in the hot seat, and actually asking me questions that we hope will be of particular interest to our audience, and particularly those who are newer members of our audience who may be just wondering what the English-speaking side of the channel is really all about. But Leyla, it is great to have you with us. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Angus. It is great to be back with you and Satluj TV and Satluj TV's audience. So thank you for having me.
Of course, and as I said in the intro, of course, you're coming back to start a new side of the channel, interviewing people, particularly as I say, related to those areas. But I do wish you the very best of luck. But I understand today it is my turn to be in the hot seat.
That's right. I can't wait. Well, I've got so many questions for you, Angus. And yes, I'm very excited about the upcoming projects that Satluj TV is going to be premiering very soon. But first, I want to get to know a little bit more about you, Angus. Why did Satluj TV bring you on?
Well, a very good question. Yeah, it was, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I started, and essentially the principle was very, very straightforward. There are a lot of Punjabi-speaking channels out there covering Sikh issues. There are a lot of these channels, of course, primarily in Punjabi, one or two in English, but they're all fronted by Sikhs, of course, from the community. And there was a feeling that we needed to broaden the audience a bit. We needed to bring or send the message of what the Sikh community is all about, what it represents, and the message it's trying to get out to the world. And we thought, well, let's just do it a different way. Let's have a white face. And of course, with my co-host, James Cousineau, based in Vancouver, the pair of us, we were brought in we started firstly with the initial shows, which were just basic news stories. That then evolved into James and myself doing the show that we now call Perspectives. And again, it was designed to send out the message of what the community stands for. Its key issues, of course, there are some very big issues that are very much relevant today. And of course, it covers a lot of the history of the Sikh community. And the Sikh community's history does go, of course, a very long way back. But James and I, in Perspectives particularly, the aim is, we framed it in a way that we are both, we sort of jokingly refer to ourselves as middle-aged white men who are clumsily learning what Sikh is all about. And that genuinely is what it really is. It's James and myself are learning what the community is all about, what its issues are, who the people are, what their philosophy is, what their outlook on life is. And I have to say, it's been an incredible journey. And we have picked up an awful lot of knowledge. We've done a lot of research into the history. Our knowledge, of course, has expanded massively. And so it has allowed us over certainly the last year, and certainly for myself, the last 2 or 3 years, it's allowed me to speak a little bit more knowledgeably. Of course, I would never call myself an expert, but at least I can talk a little bit more knowledgeably about what the Sikh community is about. But ultimately, I and by extension, James, we form an interface between the Sikh community and the wider audience. Of course, the wider audience I'm referring to as white people or other communities, not just in here in the UK or the US, but certainly across the diaspora countries and across Europe. We do have viewers right across the world, I'm delighted to say.
Yeah, this is fascinating. It's been really interesting to watch the trajectory of the network. So you alluded to it a little bit earlier. So have you found your audience, and who and where are your audience? Yeah,
good question. We have a very good, very loyal core audience, and we of course can tell this from our comments. We get a lot of comments after all our videos, and we often do invite our audience to comment. Please do comment after this one, of course, because a part of Perspectives is we do actually review the comments that we do receive, and that helps us gauge just who is watching us, who is the audience, which communities are they from? Of course, unsurprisingly, the vast majority of our audience are from the Sikh community itself. Geographically speaking, they tend to be probably, I would say, the majority in the United States and Canada. We have a good solid audience here in the UK. We actually have quite a few viewers in Australia and New Zealand, which is nice to see. One or two in Europe. I know we had a French speaker from France, and I think we have certainly at least one person in Malaysia. So we actually have a really good geographical spread. And the joy of that, of course, is we get, and again, we call the show Perspectives. It means we do get very widespread perspectives, of course, coming primarily from the Sikh community. But everybody has their own opinion, their own point of view. We don't all agree. We quite often get criticised for things that we say. We do get things wrong. And the wonderful thing about our audience is they tend to be very forgiving. So when we do clumsily get things wrong, they're very quick to point out, usually in a very polite manner, what we've done wrong and put us right. Again, all part of this sort of learning journey. We do have a few critics, and we have what we jokingly refer to as our Critics Corner, where we're not afraid of confronting our critics. In fact, I wouldn't say confronting is the wrong word. We entertain our critics. We do like to highlight any critical comments that we do get who like to sort of throw their 2 cents worth in on their opinions of us, which are not always very flattering. But of course, we're not afraid. One of our big themes of the show is all about freedom of speech, free speech. We are big believers in free speech, and we totally respect the other person's opinion. So we do expect that people in our audience will not agree with us. And when we get people from India who say, why are you so anti-India? Why are you so anti-this and anti-that and anti-Hindu? And we say, actually, ironically, we are not. We're not anti-India. We're not anti-Hindu. We are quite the opposite. And I regularly have to say and keep reminding, particularly our audiences, that we are very much pro-India. James and I love India. We love its people, we love its culture, we love everything about it. I love its food particularly. It is a fabulous country made up of the most fascinating, diverse cultures and identities. And that is what we very much do support. And likewise, I know certain elements of our audience are anti-Hindu, and that is, they are unapologetically anti-Hindu, primarily based on justifiable means. They have directly experienced the hatred, the division, and the persecution at the hands of Hindus in India. And of course, many of our audience have experienced the horrors of Punjab in the 1980s, in the 1990s, when so many, tens of thousands, were literally murdered in cold blood, extrajudicially murdered at the hands of the Indian state. And of course, the genocide of 1984, when there are many people in our audience who have family members who died in the most horrific circumstances during the Sikh genocide in 1984. So of course, they are a very, very important part of our audience. And they, of course, very often tell us about their experiences. They contribute in the comments. So, as I say, our audience is primarily Sikh, but we do get people from outside the Sikh community. We do get Hindus commenting and Christians. We get some Pakistanis. We actually have a growing audience in Pakistan. So we have a lot of Islamic members of our audience from the Punjabi side of Pakistan. It's a joy. And we do often ask our audience, let us know where you are from. And we get an awful lot of responses. And it is always quite eye-opening where they do come from. So it's, as I say, it's a very loyal, a very wonderful audience. And we are very, very appreciative of them.
Well, this brings me to my next question. So what are some of the themes that you cover?
Yeah, that's a good area to talk about. We do tend, obviously, we tend to focus on Sikh issues that affect the Sikh community. Sikh community is very widespread, geographically speaking. The diaspora, of course, is everywhere from North America to Europe to New Zealand, Australia, and as I say, Europe, Scandinavia. We've got audience in Scandinavia. So we have to try and find topics that is as relevant as possible to as widespread an audience as possible. And I remember one of our critical comments did actually criticise and say, well, what are you? Because you're talking about geopolitics of India in one breath, but you're talking about a very specific story in Canada about a Sikh issue in Canada. Yeah, I'm afraid that is what we are. We do tend to cover a huge range of topics. There are a lot of Punjabi-speaking channels out there that cover very specific, very embedded Sikh issues, things that James and I wouldn't even understand because we don't come from the community. We try not to talk about what we don't understand. And if we don't understand something, we say, look, this is an area we don't understand, and we ask our audience, you let us know, tell us, What does this mean? What's this about? And our wonderful audience are always very happy just to let us know. They do let us know in the comments, and they explain what a translation is, what a word means that we can't understand. So we have this great interaction with our audience. But the subject matter itself, we do, the structure is we do, generally speaking, we'll do 2 stories each. James tends to cover stories in Canada, again, a huge diaspora community in Canada. I tend to cover, obviously, anything to do with the UK, quite often the United States and Australia, etc. But also, we both do talk about India. A lot of our subject matter is India itself. And again, I stress, as always, we are not anti-India. What we are, and again, I repeat this almost repetitively, is we are anti-Hindutva. These are the right-wing nationalist extremists that seem to be in control of Indian politics. And they have been in control of Indian politics since 1947. I mean, that's when partition happened, when the British Empire departed India, India obtained its independence. But ultimately, what really happened in reality is the British Empire, the British ruling elite, handed the power of this colonial collection of different identities that they named India to another group of people, ruling elite, the Brahmins. This is the upper caste of India. India is still essentially controlled by a caste system. Despite the fact that this caste system is actually illegal, it still is very much structured. Indian society is still structured around its caste system. The upper caste, the Brahmanical elites, the Brahmins, and I'm simplifying the whole system because it is a very complex system, but in simplistic terms, the Brahmins are at the top of that caste pyramid, and they are the ones that control India. They are essentially, as many of my podcast guests often say, they are the new colonialists. They control this new colonial India. And it is them that we tend to target. That is the target of our channel. That is who we criticize, who we are trying to make the rest of India, and by that I include the majority Hindu population, to make them aware that you are still living under a colonial control. This caste system is like not just a straitjacket, it forms the bars of a prison that essentially controls your lives. And if you're in the lower caste, if you're a Dalit down on the bottom of this pyramid, living a miserable life of poverty, you really, really suffer under the system. But those in the middle caste, those who are not necessarily lower caste, but are not in that upper caste of Brahmins, they might not realize it. It's almost like the middle class of India. They still don't realize that they still live within this control. They almost can't see the bars of their prison, yet they are very much there. And it is them who I think is the biggest challenge to persuade. Look, you do realize that you are living in a nation that is being held back by these people, by this nationalist extremism. And again, it comes back onto this topic of what is this extremism? This extremism always comes back to Hindu extremism. It is all about Hindu superiority. And again, it's a subject we talk a lot about. There is a very small minority of Hindus who actually genuinely believe they are superior to the rest of humanity. And these are the extremists. This is the fringe element that, again, feeds into this Brahmanical control. And it is they, again, who we target, and it is they who we are trying to educate the rest of India. And I say we, the Sikh community as a whole, and this is why the Sikh community have become a target of the Brahmins, is because it is the Sikh community, and by extension us as part of their mouthpiece, it is the Sikh community who are trying to wake up Indians, ordinary Indians, to the fact of what is going on in their country. The fact that the minorities in India, and that includes the Sikh community, the Islamic community, the Christians, the Jains, they are all being persecuted by this small number of ruling elite. Their lives are being made miserable. They are finding it difficult to live a normal democratic life under a normal expected rule of law. They can't do this under what India has become. So that really is, in a very large nutshell, is really what the sorts of topics that we talk about.
So fascinating. Well, it sounds like based off of your research and experience that maybe you've formed an opinion about India.
Yes, and it's been a very interesting journey again, my opinion of India. As I said, I have always been a lover of India. And my own grandfather, who I've talked about in the past in some of our shows, he fought in India and in Burma, again, the same area where the Sikh regiments were fighting in the World War II. So I have a personal skin in the game, as they say. So I've always had an affinity with India. I've always loved everything about India and been fascinated by its history. But what I have discovered since I became involved with the Sikh community I've obviously done a lot more digging, a lot more research, and I've actually started to understand where before I just had a very superficial opinion of India, a very controlled perception of what India is. It's this idea that almost Mahatma Gandhi was spreading, this Gandhi version of India, where it's this sort of land of gurus, this land of well-being, this land of goodness. And unfortunately, it is not. It is not this land where Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, strides around the world stage saying, we are the world's largest democracy, look how great we are. It is not that. The more that James and I particularly have dug into, the more we've researched, the more information that we have dug out about what is actually really going on in India, it has shaped a very different opinion of what India is and what it is becoming. As I said, after 1947, control was handed over to the Brahmin elite. They have now controlled India since. The constitution was written between 1947 and 1950. It came into control of India. The Indian constitution was written by the Brahmins for the Brahmins, essentially to ensure that they took control of India and forevermore they would maintain control of India. And it is through the lines of that constitution that India has become and has become what it is and what it is becoming. And we often talk about, is India a democracy? That is a big question. Is India a democracy? Yes, on the face of it. If you ask any ordinary Indian, are you a democracy? They will say, of course we are. You ask Narendra Modi, yes, we are a democracy. Yet, the evidence on the ground points to a very, very different conclusion. India has a very deep and historic relationship, for example, with Moscow, with the KGB. Even Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi in the very early stages and the Gandhi dynasty have very deep ties to Moscow and the KGB. Indira Gandhi, the nemesis of the Sikh community, the lady, the Prime Minister, who years ago I used to think was an amazing character. Now I discover this lady was, I'm sorry, but I have to use the word evil. The things that she did to maintain this Brahmanical control of India was shocking. The persecution that she targeted against the Sikh community is absolutely, it goes beyond outrageous. It's not just illegal in any form of democratic morality. It actually makes the skin, crawl in fear of the things that she was planning and indeed did do. Operation Blue Star. I mean, I could go on for hours about what she did. But this was essentially all controlled indirectly by Moscow. They were effectively the puppets, let's say, of the KGB. The Soviet Union throughout the 70s and 80s had huge ambitious plans. They, of course, had this vast empire, the Soviet Union. They had aspirations to move down towards the Indian Ocean. And again, I don't want to go down too much down this road, but in simple terms, they wanted to link up the Soviet Union with the Indian Ocean. What was in the way was Afghanistan. They invaded Afghanistan. Next in line was Pakistan. And of course, that would then bridge with India. They already controlled India indirectly through the Gandhi dynasty. They were bankrolling the Indian government. Of course, we know that the Indian military was and still is to a large extent primarily funded and supplied by Russia. So again, India is essentially and has been for decades a client state of Russia, formerly the Soviet Union. And so as a result, present-day India is sitting on this balance of scales where historically it is tied to Moscow. Present day, it is still very much a friend of Moscow. It is a friend of China to some degree. There are a few tensions, let's say, but ultimately...
It's a friend of the West.
Yeah, but this is the key issue here. Is India a friend of the West? And this is a question that we ask a lot. And again, my opinion of India very much is influenced by my research into this area. India has demonstrated it is not really a democracy in the true sense of the word. India does not follow a democratic rule of law, despite having inherited a very complex but very effective legal system from the British Empire. It has modified it and it has become more authoritarian. So India has a choice and has faced this choice for the last few years. Is it heading in the direction of authoritarianism and therefore aligning more closely with the authoritarian states like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, etc.? Or is it genuinely a democracy? Will it align with North America, Europe, down under, etc.? In other words, which side is India on? Now, at the moment, India is on nobody's side. technically speaking. It has not chosen sides, but it will come a point one day probably where it may well have to choose sides. And the West has spent the last few years working overtime to entice, to influence, to manipulate, just to use every trick in the book to try and get India to align with the West, to become a genuine democracy, because we in the West need India as an ally, because the threat regionally is China. China is the big future threat, is the growing superpower. If India allies with China, that is a huge problem for the West. If India allies with us, that is a huge problem for China. We all know which side of the coin that obviously we would prefer to fall. So genuinely speaking, Leyla, I would say my opinion has changed of India. It has become very wary. I fear for India. I fear for India's future. But I still have a huge hope, and I have a huge belief, inevitability in India and India's future. I genuinely think India may one day fall apart. We don't know for sure, but there is a real possibility that India could actually break up, because as I said earlier, it is an artificial construct of the British Empire, brought together by force, held together by force by the British, and by inheritance continued to be held by force, intimidation, whatever you want to call it, by the Brahmins, the controlling elite of India. That is the situation now. But the Soviet Union exploded apart. Yugoslavia exploded apart, all through small, unpredictable, unforeseeable catalytic events. That is what I foresee for India. I think one day in the foreseeable future there will be a catalytic event that will cause the break apart of India. That is my opinion.
That's really interesting. Do you have a timeline? Do you have any sense of when this could take place?
I thought I did, and originally I thought, and in fact, when I met with one of the founders, in fact, the key founder of Satluj TV, Tony Mangat, and we had this discussion, and we talked about the concept of Khalistan, this sovereign, independent state for the Sikh community, the Sikhs, and I said, how long do you think it's going to take? Well, he actually asked me the same question. He said, how long do you think it'll take for Khalistan to happen, and therefore essentially the indirect breakup of India? And I said, well, actually, I think it could happen, but it will take a generation. By that, I mean realistically, maybe 20 years, 25 years. I think it will take a generation. The momentum is building, definitely. The momentum is there. I think the pieces are falling into place. I think it will realistically take 20 to 25 years. But Tony Mangat is of a very different opinion. He looked me squarely in the eye, and I would say passion blazed in his eyes. Absolutely, total, utter belief. He said it's going to happen within 5 years. He was absolutely no ambiguity. He said it is going to happen. God is making this happen. His faith is absolute. He is absolute faith. And he knows within 5 years, Khalistan will happen. And I have to say, he's a very, very charismatic character. I believe him. I really do.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you think India has broken international law? And do you believe that it's behind the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and Avtar Singh Kanda, among others, of course?
Yes, I do. And going back to sort of the research that we've done and the knowledge that James and I have gained, it is very clear that there is a lot of evidence pointing. At the moment, there is no absolute damning proof that India was behind these murders of Khalistani activists. But of course there wouldn't be, because India's not that stupid. But the belief is, and it is a very believable chain of evidence, that India has used proxy killers. It's murdered these Khalistani activists by proxy. It's used criminal gangs to undertake these operations, because it knows that there is a fire break between these criminal gangs and the Indian intelligence services. So in other words, this chain, which has been publicly proclaimed by US and Canadian governments, they have both said publicly they believe this chain of command behind these murders, and of course the attempted assassination of Gurpratwant Singh Punnia in New York, they believe that chain of command went from the on-the-ground killers, the actual guns for hire, were hired by operatives of Indian intelligence, who in turn were reporting in to Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor of India, who in turn was reporting in to the right-hand man of Narendra Modi, and therefore there's no way that Narendra Modi would not be aware of this. So ultimately, again, the proof is probably there. It is, of course, explosive proof if it came out into the public domain. The diplomatic outfall of this would be absolutely seismic if it was proved publicly. So it is unlikely it will come out publicly and be proved for all the world to see. What I suspect will happen is that behind the scenes, everybody knows. They know that Canada knows. Canada knows that they know that they know. In other words, all the parties involved know that India were behind it. And India knows that everybody knows they were behind it. So they will all come around a table, metaphorically speaking, and say, okay. And the West will say to India, look, okay, if you don't want this to explode out of control and for us to basically sanction you forevermore, which of course is going to really damage you as a nation, and of course the reputational damage to India will take generations to recover from, you will align with us. You will work with us in the West. You will become our ally and our friend. We don't need to talk about this nastiness. We can brush it under the carpet. The price of that is you become our ally in that region. I suspect that is what's going on behind the scenes. I suspect Narendra Modi is probably quite willing to do that. I think the BJP and the ruling elite are probably thinking, you know what, maybe we are better off aligning with the West. Who knows? That is speculation. But ultimately, and back to the original question, Leyla, yes, I do think India was behind these murders because Khalistani campaigners have become a real, genuine, existential threat to Brahmanical control of India. Because they are calling out, firstly, what is really going on in India and this persecution of the minorities like the Sikh community, but they're also at the forefront, the vanguard of the Khalistan movement. The Khalistan movement is this hugely powerful, this hugely successful movement that is growing and growing in weight and momentum now, that is driving forward this real belief that Khalistan, this independent Sikh sovereign nation, is going to happen. India is terrified of this. They literally will do anything, as it turns out. They will do anything to stop this happening, and that includes murdering high-profile campaigners who have been campaigning for the Khalistan movement.
So for the Western mind, the Western sensibility and understanding, or I should say lack thereof, maybe you could share with our audience who is maybe coming into this with no prior historic knowledge, what is Khalistan? Maybe you can explain who the people are and also what it would take to break up India, considering how far they will go to maintain control.
The concept of Khalistan it is a very historic one, and we go all the way back to the Sikh Empire of the 19th century. And the Sikh Empire was an extraordinarily successful empire. Obviously, it was a governance of a large, vast geographical area around what covered all the way around not just present-day Punjab, but all the way up to Ladakh on the Chinese border, all the way up into Afghanistan, all the way down into Delhi. It was a vast empire controlled under Sikhi, under the Sikh religion. And the Maharaja, Ranjit Singh at the time, created this empire, and it was run in, I have to say, an extraordinarily effective democratic manner. It was run under Sikhi principles, and it was a unique version of democracy, and it worked extremely well, extraordinarily well. It was known the world over for its peaceful democracy. It was world renowned for its version of society where everybody, didn't matter what their background, their religion, whatever, everybody was treated as equal. Women, particularly under Sikhi, were treated, and this is going back to the 19th century when we obviously lived in a very different world. Even the British Empire saw women effectively as second-class citizens. Not in the Sikh Empire. Women were treated as absolute equals, as written in black and white in the Holy Scriptures from the very first Guru. That was way ahead of its time. The Sikh Empire was centuries ahead of its time. So that has always stood as a beacon to future generations of the Sikh community. That is what we want back. So fast forward, of course, through the decades, through the centuries, and through the 20th century, and through partition. And of course, when partition happened, dreadful carnage of 1 million people, at least estimated to be murdered in the carnage of partition. And a large part of that massacre, of course, was Sikhs. And as part of the partition negotiation, Sikhs were promised their homeland. They were promised a region that they could control, they could make their own decisions. They effectively had autonomy over their own lives, their own society. That is what they were promised in 1947 if they agreed to the Brahmanical version of India. And of course, they were betrayed. They were promised one thing, and as soon as the Brahmins took control from the British, Those promises were forgotten, and the Sikhs were basically pushed aside and said, sorry, forget it, forget what we said, tough. What are you going to do about it? And the Sikhs, of course, couldn't do practically very much about it because, of course, they were a tiny minority. They're up against an 85 or 89% population majority of Hindus. So, of course, they couldn't do very much. But, of course, Sikhs being Sikhs, they did fight back. They fought back vigorously. They fought back aggressively in the best way that they knew in that time. They fought back as hard as they could. And they were met with the most diabolical, the most dreadful, the most illegal, let's put it for what it was, the most illegal manner that any government could do. They were met with brute force. They were met with murder and genocide by the Indian state. They took up arms to fight back in defense of this. They were literally tens of thousands of young Sikhs in the 1980s and 1990s were taken out of the countryside by the police. This is the state police, took them out of the countryside and murdered them, shot them dead, and then cremated them, and their ashes disappeared. And the murders were anonymously. They were literally disappeared. They were just removed from society. Of course, the truth came out over decades. And those people who tried to bring out the truth of what happened during that terrible time, they themselves were murdered. And I could name several people. Jaswant Singh Kalra is a prime example of this. Many of these shaheeds, these martyrs, did their very best to highlight what happened. Even today, a British citizen, Jagtar Singh Johal, he himself is in prison. He's a British citizen in prison for 8 years nearly in India because he himself highlighted what happened during those dreadful times. All these people at the time said the only answer to all this, to this ongoing murder of Punjabi Sikhs, is we have to have our own land, our own safety, our own sanctuary. We need a land that we can call our own, that we govern, that we make the decisions, that can be a sanctuary, a harbour for Sikhs, safe away from this persecution from these Hindu extremists. That is, in essence, what Khalistan is. Now, that is its history. What is Khalistan? Khalistan is a concept. It is a geographical area, an area to be defined yet, but we do have some ideas on that, which will be governed under the same principles as this Sikh empire I started with. It will be governed under this unique form of democracy that I believe is the purest, most effective form of democracy that exists on this planet. That is how Khalistan will be governed. Khalistan will be like the Sikh Empire. It will be open to all people. It will not be a Sikh theocracy. It will not be run by Sikhs for Sikhs alone. It will be run by anybody who is democratically elected under this governance system, and everybody is welcome. Hindus, Christians, any background, everybody will be welcome. Everybody will be treated equally. Everybody will have an equal voice. It will remove that dreadful persecution that is prevalent in India. That will not exist in Khalistan. It is ultimately, it is revisiting, it is reliving this Sikh empire. It is the new Sikh empire. Strategically speaking, it is an absolute no-brainer. I'm a huge believer in it. The more I learn about it, the more I think it will be an absolute win-win for everybody.
So fascinating. I just have a couple more questions for you, Angus. Do you think Khalistan will be a success?
Yes, absolutely, no question. I think because, as I just said, it is a win-win for everybody. It forms, and of course we've seen recently between India and Pakistan are just perpetual enemies. I don't think they are ever going to settle their differences. There's just too much cultural difference. Khalistan has been touted as a solution to this, the permanent solution. You run a strip of land down the border between India and Pakistan, call it Khalistan, you have a buffer zone, a strategic area that forms that buffer zone that keeps those two warring countries apart. Strategically speaking, it will be run on democratic grounds. It will be a genuinely democratic nation, which means it will have the support of the West. The West will love it because it will be a footprint of democracy in that region. Strategically speaking, militarily speaking, it allows the ability for Western military to site forces in a very, very key strategic area. It is literally on the border of China. It borders Pakistan near Iran, etc. It has oversight of the Indian Ocean. Strategically speaking, Khalistan is essential for the West as a strategic post in that region. It will be a success economically because it has a lot of natural resources. It is the breadbasket of India. It has hugely fertile grounds. It is the floodplains of the Indus. It is the floodplains of the 5 rivers. Satluj is the 5 rivers. It literally is it is the bread, as I say, it's the breadbasket of India. Most of India's food supplies are grown in what will be Khalistan. So in terms of raw materials, it's got it in spades. So yes, economically it will be a success. Commercially it will be a success because it will be governed in the manner of a Western commercial model, because Sikhs by their very nature are entrepreneurial. One thing I've really learned about the Sikh community, they are genetically, for some reason, just made to be entrepreneurial. Wherever you find a Sikh, anywhere in the world, in the diaspora, they have built business, they have built society, they have built livelihoods. They just build, they are creative, they just get down and start working, and they build, and they usually make a success. So of course, you combine that into the synergy of a whole nation of Sikhs, and you will see a nation that will be commercially, no doubt, a massive success. It will also have the backing of, I believe, the Western nations, financially speaking. It will, of course, need practical things like a central bank. It will need a currency, all these things. But I've no doubt that Western nations will support it financially in those early days to get it off the ground. Of course, establishing a new country is a massive operation from every possible angle. It will need a huge amount of capital to get it off the ground. That capital, I believe, will be supplied by the West. Of course, China, I have no doubt, will be knocking on the door, eager to jump in there as well. But I believe Khalistan will obviously turn to the West for that. And that capital will be the seed capital that will grow Khalistan into, I believe, one of the world's greatest commercial successes.
Goodness gracious. Well, here's my last question, the $1 million question. How will Khalistan come about? What does that process look like?
Wow, that is a big question. And I think the simple answer is, I don't really know. Nobody really knows. And I go back to the Soviet Union and the Yugoslavia examples. The breakup of those countries, was totally unpredictable. They literally came out of the blue. It took one totally unforeseeable, almost unrelated event. The fall of the Berlin Wall, for example, was just the weirdest, unpredictable sequence of events that came down to literally human failures, individual human failures, that fell ultimately to the fall of the Berlin Wall and in turn the fall of the Soviet Union. Nobody could have predicted that, but it happened literally, or not literally, but almost literally in the blink of an eye. It happened so quickly. And this is what I think may well happen with India. The movement for Khalistan is enormous. There is this referendum that is going on around the world, around the diaspora. Sikhs for Justice have launched this referendum. It's been going on for a couple of years now. It's taken place in all the diaspora countries, whether in Europe, here in the UK, North America, Canada, Australia. It's been there. We've seen huge turnouts. Hundreds of thousands of people from the Sikh community have turned out to vote in this referendum. Yes or no? Do you support the concept of Khalistan or not? Again, very democratic. Everybody has the absolute democratic right to say no. And India always makes a huge play of, oh, it's just a fringe element. Nobody in India, nobody in Punjab, nobody in the Sikh community really wants Khalistan. Well, as we keep saying, really? If that's true, then hold a referendum in Punjab. And they don't, and they won't. Why? Because they know full well that the pro-Khalistan movement in Punjab is huge. We know this because 2 MPs were elected last June in the last general election. They were Punjabi Sikhs campaigning on a pro-Khalistan ticket. Amritpal Singh, one of them, who's actually in prison for his views, they were voted on pro-Khalistan tickets, and their majorities in their constituencies were unprecedented. They were the largest majorities ever seen in each of their constituencies. And that sends a message to Delhi, it sends a message to the world. The support for Khalistan democratically is massive. It is clearly a majority. And this is why we're campaigning for a referendum. If India is pressured by the global community to holding a referendum, as is the democratic right in Punjab under international law, under United Nations directions, it has the right to demand a referendum. If it's granted, I have no doubt that Khalistan will be a yes vote. It will happen. Ultimately, we talk about a fall of dominoes. I think Khalistan will happen, and if and when it does happen, I think it will then cause all these other parts of India, Jammu and Kashmir, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Manipur, all these other areas that have all got their own independence movements, they will then get the confidence to then stand up and say, well, we want this too. We are culturally different. We don't belong to anything, or we're not relevant to Delhi. We want to run our own affairs. We are culturally worlds apart from Delhi and the Hindus, etc. in Delhi. So it is likely that they in turn will demand referenda, and that is probably what will then lead up to the breakup of India. What do I believe will happen then? I think India will then become a union, like the European Union. I think it will become a union of federated states, federal countries of Khalistan, of Jammu and Kashmir, whatever everybody decides to name their nation. That is what I see as the future of India. But I have absolutely no doubt it is coming. The question is when. Big question.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, goodness. Angus, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel so enriched by our discussion. I know more about Khalistan and the Sikh community now than I ever have previously. So thank you so much for kind of just spelling it out for us who are not as familiar with that part of the world and how incredibly crucial it is to the peace in that region.
Been an absolute pleasure, Leyla, and I likewise wish you the very best of luck. Thank you for rejoining us on the channel, and I will watch your forthcoming interviews with great interest. But until then, it's been an absolute pleasure being a guest of yours, Leyla.
Thank you so much, Angus. Yes, I'm very excited as well, and I think we're going to have some really interesting conversations and discussions coming up in the very near future. Well, that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for watching Satluj TV.